All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we're going to talk about the teen mental illness epidemic that began essentially in 2012. This is 4 years after the iPhone has been brought out. Jonathan Hyde, someone I refer to often, has put together a short essay here on what the arguments are against him in talking about how this epidemic of social media, especially the internet, also parenting, other things that go along with this. So, safetyism, that as he talks about, the helicopter parenting, all these things combined, but especially the social media. As kids are reared on social media, as they're brought up on social media more and more, there are serious psychological issues that are affecting them. This applies a little bit to the millennials, but primarily to Gen Z, right? So I want to go through this a little bit. He put an entire document together. It's 185 pages. That takes a little bit for me to digest, but I will also do a separate episode specifically on his paper. It could be a 400, 500-page book if you wanted it to be, but we'll do that separately. I want to go over just kind of a 30,000-foot level approach to these things. First of all, one of the arguments against what Jonathan Hyde is saying, in that this is such a real problem that we are not addressing. One of the pushbacks is that this happens with every generation. It's like all these whippersnappers, right? The kids these days, and there is an element to that. And I think that element is increasing. I think that the disparity between the generations is increasing as technology increases. In other words, if you were to go back 300 years and generation to generation, outside of environmental disasters and war, which certainly it existed, right? For the most part, you're not going to typically see these massive changes in culture, or typically culture is going to be a little more slight. There are obviously changes from war. There are changes in who's king or queen can be big changes from generation to generation. So things do change, but technology has exacerbated these changes. And we can go back to the 60s and you see a very large change. It was, the movement was, part of that movement for college students, for example, was don't trust anyone over 30, right? That was part of what they were trying to do. It's like and people try to take advantage of this idea with the younger generation and put in their own ideologies with them and kind of put firm up the barrier between the generations culturally. But in the 60s, you had the pill, you had television. These were massive, massive changes through technology that the kids at that time were brought up with and things that changed for them. And so, of course, you get sex, drugs, and rock and roll. There is, you had a larger, there was more accessibility to drugs, to illicit drugs at the time as well. And so you do get a change in culture from these things. Unfortunately, we're human, and our nature says that the numbers game is that we're going to go more toward the lower common denominator when these changes come about. And that is a problem, right? But it is what happens. So now you move to today and with Gen Z, and you have these kids that in 2012, there was a big shift. Number one, with the iPhone coming out in 2008, everybody had access, their own little access to all the information in the world, right? And so let's say that you are an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, and the parents buy their kids these phones at these ages and let them have these phones. Well, they're seeing things constantly and being dished certain information based on algorithms and their profiles. But what really changes is when they get onto social media. In 2012, there's a very large shift in behavior that happens on the universities. Two things happen. Number one, those that were brought up through high school on the iPhone and with social media are now on campus in the universities. And big behavioral changes starting in 2012 to 2014. The second thing is in 2012, the like button is added to Facebook and to other social media platforms. This changes the game entirely. Now you have given a technological platform for the great and spacious building, for fingers pointing, for shame, etc., right? And for pride to some degree, right? And how many likes I'm going to get. And you're, especially as you're developing as a kid emotionally, these are very important issues. But so this is what Jonathan Hyde is saying. Look, we've gone through the studies. We can show you facts, both actual facts and actual numbers, and then of course social science numbers that aren't hard science, but they're social science. They can show both from these things. So he goes into each one of these things. He says, look, I would expect you to look at my arguments for what's happening with Gen Z skeptically, but then look at the hard data, is his approach on this. So here's a couple of the examples that things that have come up against what Jonathan Hyde is saying on this mental illness epidemic that is happening. Here's one that was brought up against him. Quote, remove the girl or boy of today from radio, the telephone, furnace heat, the automobile, the library, movies, and other forms of amusement and comfort. Give them merely a jackknife and nature's unchanging wonders for amusement, and how would they fare? Right, here's another one. From Greek poet Hesiod to modern youth bashers led by psychological professor Jonathan Haidt and Jean Twenge and former First Lady Michelle Obama, no one says anything new. Hesiod cornered the market with his no hope for the future of our people rant against the reckless, frivolous youth of today. Well, again, that has always existed. As I said, there always are these shifts, these changes that happen, right? But there is a very big difference in what is happening with social media and again, I would say a big part of it is also the parenting change to safetyism. My kid cannot have a problem. If my kid has a problem, then somebody else is causing this. And I'm going after that person. And I'm going to have protectionism, blankets and blankets and blankets of protectionism over my kid. They're not going to be allowed to fail. The problem is always out there. They can't go further than 5 feet away from me. There's no unsupervised play with them. These are real issues because kids do not develop the ability to work out problems on their own. There's always an authority figure, their parent or someone at school, that is going to take care of the problem for them. This is where you get the rise of microaggressions coming in as well. So he comes up with this paper, this 185-page paper, again, that I'll cover in more depth in another episode, that really is packed with information. And here's a few things that I'm just going to pull from it, from just generalizing on this, to help us understand what is going on with the mental illness with Gen Z. Okay, the first one I want to talk about is the increases in self-reported depression and anxiety. They're through the roof. So do members of Gen Z say that their mental health is declining? Yes, in every study we can find. In every study we can find. We cannot find any studies on the other side. I will focus today's post on data from the United States. This is Jonathan Haidt. A graph showing the differences here. You have U.S. teens with major depression. Since 2010, 2 years after the iPhone came out, girls' major depression has increased 145%, right? Girls with major depression, right? Real issues, not just being sad, right? Real issues. For boys, it's up even more, 161% for boys, an increase in major depression. Major issue, right? With undergrads, U.S. undergrads diagnosed with a mental illness, there is a 134% increase in those diagnosed with anxiety. There is a 106% increase in those diagnosed with depression. There is a 72% increase in those diagnosed with ADHD. There is a 57% increase in those diagnosed with being bipolar, a 100% increase in those with anorexia. With those with substance abuse and addiction, there's an increase of, let me get this right, 33%. And schizophrenia has a 67% increase since 2010. So what is happening? Well, again, there are a lot of other issues. The parenting is one of the issues. Kids are not allowed to develop strength the way they have in the past. The safetyism is out of control. But another part of this, and probably the biggest factor, is the issue of social media. The constant concern, the constant anxiety of how popular are you and do people approve of you? Are you part of the hive? Or what do you have to do to make sure that you are part of the hive? Here's another one that comes from the study here and the paper that they did, and that's an increase in self-harm. This is from psychiatrist Richard Friedman in the New York Times in 2018. Quote, "Despite news to the contrary, there is little evidence of an epidemic of anxiety disorders in teenagers." Okay, this is the mainstream message that is going out there. "There are a few surveys reporting increased anxiety in adolescents, but these are based on self-reported measures from kids or their parents, which tend to overestimate the rates of disorders because they detect mild symptoms, not clinically significant syndromes." Okay. Now, this argument is heard less often nowadays, but it was made by one critic recently in response to a Wall Street Journal article that Jonathan Haidt put out in an interview he had. Vicki Phillips in Forbes, in an essay entitled "Gen Z, Hopeless or Hopeful," says the following about Jonathan Haidt. "Haidt fails to note the remarkable truth. Gen Z is in fact embracing a new, more open and honest relationship with their mental health, one that destigmatizes the issue." This would be a very popular part of the message that you get in therapy right now, so that it can be addressed, right? The mental health can be addressed. "This is leading to more people reporting their mental health challenges and seeking support and contributing to the rising number of reported cases." This is true. This is in part true. "More effective diagnoses and increased connection to care are both good by any measure," right? Okay, but here's the problem. If these two arguments are correct, right, that the kids are all right, and there is just an appearance of an epidemic, an illusion to these things for Gen Z, right, then we would not see any change in objective measures of mental health. But we do, right? Hospitalizations for self-harm, for one, are way up, right? Deaths by suicide are way up, right? We do see these changes. And the timing and the magnitude of these changes match the changes in the self-reported mental health problems. They go up together, right? So this is all part of this study that they're showing. For example, for U.S. teens that were admitted to hospitals for non-fatal self-harm, right? For girls, it was up 48% since 2010. And for boys, it's up 37%. We don't hear about that one as much, but it's up 37% since 2010. So these are hard facts. These are not just social science studies, right? These are actual problems that we are seeing with hospitalization. Now, furthermore, For U.S. teens admitted to hospitals for non-self-harm, all the way down to ages 10 to 14, right? In that area of junior high and, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grades, we see an immense increase in this self-harm. 188% since 2010 in that age group. And for boys, it's up 48% in that age group from 10 to 14 since 2010. So you need to take into consideration for your kids and your grandkids and for society as a whole, these kids at this age, what is going on? How many of them have access to iPhones and to social media ages 10 to 14? How many of them are receiving different information in their education, in their public schools that are causing these problems and exposing them perhaps to things that they should not be exposed to, adult things, right? These are real facts, on the ground, hard facts. Last one I want to go over. Hard fact, increases in suicide, right? This is for U.S. teens, suicides ages 15 to 19. So mostly right in the high school range there, up through maybe freshmen in college. In boys, the increase is a 34% increase since 2010. For girls, it is up 82%. All of these are major factual increases, boots on the ground, hard facts for mental illness for Gen Z. Now, that number, by the way, for the teen suicides, the number, I don't remember what the exact number is. It's still much larger for boys than it is for girls. So you had boys way up here, and then you have girls here, and the increases for both of them as they've gone up, it's just that the girls have increased more than the boys have. Boys still, by far, are the ones who actually take their lives. A lot of times the girls will do it a little bit more for attention and in some ways a cry for help, right? Whereas the boys actually are a little more aggressive with it and actually do it more often. So those are horrible numbers, right? It's very difficult to see this. It's very difficult to understand what is happening here with Gen Z, and we don't talk about it enough. Why aren't we talking more about the kids? Look at the issues that are happening in education right now with kids and what we're allowing to come in here, these pernicious ideologies, the drag shows to kindergartners and elementary schools, and all these things, sexualizing them and thinking that we need to bring in this information. I feel that when a society has really fallen, it's when there is no care for the kids. When we just don't care enough for the kids anymore, right? When we move to that, let's call it a millstone, not a milestone, a millstone moment in a society where we're worthy of having that millstone on us, right? As we're told in the scriptures. Back to suicides. And now we'll go to ages 10 to 14. Boys, 109% increase. Girls, 134% increase. So you can see where the real problem is coming. We can't wait till high school with these issues. We have got to address this very early on. The problems are coming in 5th, 6th grade, age 10, and in through junior high with Gen Z. We are creating an environment, a society for these kids that is, it's difficult, right? Because on one side you have overparenting, and then on the other side you have all of this access that they have to all this information from different media, whether it's their iPhone or their teacher or whatever they're being taught at school, and especially social media. And so it's like, well, wow, we need to become even more hyper-parenting in our approach to watch over them. But in reality, what we need is to get them off of social media, not allow them with an iPhone early in their life. And then on the other side, give them unsupervised play with others, where they have unsupervised time, where they're not being hovered over, But they're also not having access to digital information. That's the key. So mental illness is on the rise for Gen Z, immensely on the rise. We need to look and understand that the changes that are happening in society are not all good. They are hurting the kids. And we do have an epidemic of mental illness with Gen Z at this point. And part of that is the identitarianism. I mean, part of that mental illness is, well, maybe I need to identify as this. Maybe I need to identify as that. Maybe I need to find, I feel this way and I need to find the problem, and it must be out there, because that's what they're taught. That's how they're brought up. That's what social media also tells them. The problem's out there. We need to really adjust the way we approach the kids and how we develop them and their own strength, and tying them to real, true principles of success and self-confidence and the ability to fail and respond and overcome without the world and the online mob monitoring everything that they do and everything that they say. I'll follow up with a more in-depth coverage on this on the 185-page report that John Hyde has put out on this. But I really like him. I think he is spot on in what he talks about. He is the very reason that I started looking into identitarianism and critical social justice back in 2012, because of what he saw happening on the campuses. Thanks for listening.